Pokemon Scarlet and Violet have introduced probably the biggest power creep in recent memory. From Pokemon that just don't die, to Pokemon that get moves that reach an absurd power level, to a whole new variant of Pokemon that have stats that resemble a nuclear bomb. All capped off with a legendary quartet that encapsulate most of these aspects, having abilities that reduce the opponent's stats simply by existing. But these Pokemon were introduced in a region that just don't match the difficulty level implied by their existence. So how about we use Pokemon that actually do? Can we beat a hardcore Nuzlocke in Pokemon Scarlet using the worst Pokemon? You know, out of the ones that got their visas approved. You already know the rules of a hardcore Nuzlocke, so to summarize, if a Pokemon faints, it's no longer usable. I can't use items in battle, but held items are fine. We'll be playing on set mode, and we can't overlevel past the next level cap, which I'll be basing mostly on the gyms. But before moving on to the next gym, I'll have to do all of the boss battles within the said level cap first. Now, there are quite a few factors that could determine what makes up the worst Pokemon. They could have a really bad typing, a very limited moveset, terrible stats, or all of the above. And I actually did come up with somewhat of a formula to calculate this. Then I realized I would have to cross-reference this every single time I run into a Pokemon. And as it turns out, I'm perfectly happy playing a 50-hour-long Ditto-only challenge, but draw the line at 3rd grade maths. So instead, I decided to go with a much simpler system and will only use Pokemon with a base stat total below 280. This admittedly is a pretty arbitrary number. For comparison, the starter Pokemon usually have an average of 310, and this is 30 points below that. This will give us an encounter pool of roughly 40 Pokemon to choose from, which may seem like a lot, but you'll find a lot of them seem to share similar properties, namely types. There is certainly some bias when it comes to strength, or in this case, lack of. I still don't really have an ideal system to handle encounters, as quite a lot of the mons that we're allowed to use are only present in the first few areas, giving us roughly only 15 encounters throughout the game, which is most definitely not enough for this challenge. So instead, I decided to take a page out of my Hisuian Pokemon playthrough and will give myself an encounter for every story event I complete, 2 for each gym. Including the 3 mons I'll start with, this gives us about 35 encounters throughout the entire game, which is about the average for a mainline campaign. But enough of me rambling, let's jump in. As I mentioned at the beginning, the actual starters surpass the limit that we've set. I of course still pick Fuecoco because Meowscarada with an always crit move is typically the scariest starter to be up against. And not because I can't say no to that face. Rather, I figure, what better Pokemon as our starter than the first one we're forced to catch? Lechonk. Whom I do love, but quite honestly is just not going to be very useful in this run. This is more symbolic rather than anything. I haven't actually lost a run in these games yet, but typically I set my initial start point in Mesagoza after the school stuff. You know, so I don't have to sit through an hour-long cutscene every single time I start a run. So I usually rush past this first portion of the game without thinking much since the Nuzlocke hasn't started yet. But even so, I've not lost to Arven until now, and only just saw what they say afterwards. And they're brutal. Imagine reading "You have no future" as an 8-year-old. Kinda wish they stayed that way, to be honest. But we still do have 2 encounters to round up, one of which we can actually get right away in the first area. The first Pokemon I target is our boy Pooper, and specifically reset until I get one with the ability Water Absorb. This is important as one thing you'll notice across our encounters is that we resist very few types. And Pooper is one that actually has an amazing defensive type this early on. And having that extra immunity to water early on is just the cherry on top. This will be one Pokemon that will be a mainstay and must be protected, as in this challenge, tanks are pretty rare. We do have access to a free ability capsule through mystery gifts, but we're so early in the game that resets don't really matter at this point. And there's a Pokemon that we need later on who will be much more necessary for if we get the wrong ability. Also, yeah, good time to mention that the reset counter is kind of irrelevant as I completely forgot to change it. And instead of heading towards the gym, we'll be going through the opposite exit in East Mesagoza, head up this incline and abduct this little Charcadet hanging out. This will be our one and only fire type for the entire game, and that's only one of our limitations. But for now, it's all we need. On to Katie. I lead with Pooper on Nimble and immediately set up a layer of toxic spikes as Nimble uses a Struggle Bug. Now Struggle Bug is weak against Charcadet, but it also lowers special attack, which we don't want, so into Lechonk. And after confirming that it's baited into using Double Kick, into Charcadet on the next. Now we can just Terrasilize Charcadet to one-shot with Ember. Ember one-shots Tarantula. And finally comes out Teddiursa, which after Terrasilizing is weak to Ember. It outspeeds. Okay, Fury Swipes hits twice, it could have absolutely killed. Honestly would have been grounds to reset. But now Ember doesn't get the kill. This could be an issue. And then it starts raining. Why is everything going wrong? I have to switch. And sorry buddy, you're the only one I don't really need. But now we're in a situation where the next Fury Cutter will do double damage. I switch into Pooper. And it survives. A poison tail brings it low, and the poison finishes Teddiursa off. We're only on the first gym, and we've already lost a Pokemon. To be fair, as much as it pains me to say, I don't really see a niche that Lechonk could have covered. There are plenty of other bulky normal types available to us, and with 2 new encounters, we're about to catch one. Just outside of Cortondo, we can find Jigglypuff, who, while technically being a second stage Pokemon, is in fact eligible by our rules. And this thing is a tank. It doesn't have the best defenses, but its HP more than makes up for it. Plus, with some pretty good support moves, this is another Pokemon that will be a mainstay on our team. And the next Pokemon I catch is actually one for later, that being Smoliv. This won't be too useful yet, but grass types are super helpful for this run with their massive library of support moves. Anyway, neither of these two are important just yet. The Titan Claw is more or less walled by Pooper, so we can just whittle it down with Mudshot, while Arven chooses to tune in to help out every now and then. After a certain point, I do switch out to Jigglypuff to take another hit, as I was a bit worried about block, and finally finish it off with the Cavette. Long battle, but not too hard. Just a little scary after the Anger Shell boost. With our new encounter slot, we can immediately get our next target, Makuhisa, our only fighting type. Unfortunately, this is going to be a running theme, and there are some types that we just straight up have no access to. But for Brassius, I think we're ready. Brassius leads with Petalil and I send out Pooper. Now just a note, I may have messed up the level cap for this gym. Let's just move past this as I introduce you to one of the reasons Pooper is invaluable. It learns Toxic Spikes by level up, but before we can attack, Petalil puts us to sleep. No matter, as Pooper has done her part. Into Charcadet, and the next part should be familiar. We terrestrialize and burn through half of his team, until Sudowoodo comes out. I'm not sure how much a boosted Ember will do, but a single rock throw could kill me. And like I said, this is the only fire type we'll have for the entire game. She still has her uses. So, already on the second gym, we're gonna resort to a classic Toxic Stall. And man, I really hope you enjoy them, because this is far from the last time we're gonna see this strat. Sudowoodo's only ever baited into using Troll Blaze and Rock Throw, so we can just alternate between Makuhisa and Charcadet until Sudowoodo succumbs to poison, and we get our second badge. So yeah, not a particularly threatening battle, but I've already revealed our main hand. We do so little damage with the Pokemon that we have available that a Toxic Stall, for more than a few important battles, will actually be the quickest way to handle them. But with 2 new encounters, we should probably start preparing for the battle that I dread the most. Because Iona's Mismagius hits hard, and we have access to very few Pokemon who resist her attacks. So the next 2 Pokemon that we're going to catch are both electric types. We already have 2 Pokemon who are immune to Ghost. The first one I target is Shinx, who we get lucky with and land one with Intimidate, which is massive as now we can basically disregard many physical attackers with some strategic switching. I would have actually considered resetting if we didn't get one. And the next one is kind of a dud as I go for a Paw Me, assuming that it got Volt Absorb, not realizing that I can only gain that ability on evolution. And it's not really that bulky where it can take multiple not very effective attacks. But before we can take on Iono, we still do have 2 boss battles, which means 2 more encounters. For Bombardier, I lead with Shinx to immediately cut his attack, and Spark does over half. I was not expecting that from Shinx. We can just use one more and onto the second phase. Now this time, we once again send out Shinx to cut her attack, but we've already taken quite some damage. So we're just gonna let Arven take this as I bring out Paw Me. The next time Bombardier hits us, it gets paralyzed, which is exactly what I was trying to go for with Nuzzle. But with that, we can bring Shinx back out as Bombardier targets Knackly and outspeed to finish it off with Spark. Pretty straightforward. We'll save the encounter for now. Onto the first Team Star base. And yeah, these boss battles are not ones I'm looking forward to. Pawny is pretty easy. We have Charcadet who can use a super effective Ember, which reveals a 3-hit KO. I wasn't expecting my encounters to already be this weak. Pawny does outspeed and also 3-shots us, but Charcadet's holding an Oran Berry, allowing us to win the one-on-one. But out comes Revavroom, and this thing sucks. For one, it's incredibly bulky with buff stats, which in tandem with our little babies barely able to do any damage, could take ages to beat normally. But even worse, they can't be statist, so we're forced to beat them the honorable way. Now poison's one thing, but we can't even burn them to half their attacks, or paralyze them to half their speed. But we have a Shinx that can lower its attack with Intimidate. After taking a strong Wicked Talk, despite the drop, I switch runs Jigglypuff as it falls asleep. I'm gonna be honest, I've never been on this boss long enough to know that it does that. Well, into Paw Me on the Swift, then into Makuhisa on another Wicked Talk, which doesn't activate sleep this time. I terrestrialize immediately and get hit with the metal sound, halving our special defense. And a Force Palm still doesn't do quite as much as I was hoping. Revavroom doesn't have good special attack, but we can't stay in at half defenses. So I bring out Shinx once again on the Swift and then back into Makuhita on the Snarl. While Swift still does do a lot, our Oran Berry allows us to stay in for 2 more Force Palms. But I think that's about all Makuhita can do. The thing is now, I need a safe switch. Makuhita is still very valuable considering his unique typing, so I'm sorry, poor me. I use a sacrifice to bring out the slumbering Jigglypuff. Now, we're still asleep, but Revavroom is forced into using special attacks, which we can take pretty well. With the Oran Berry, we're able to just stay alive at half health as we wake up to use a stockpile, raising both of our defenses. And allow me to introduce you to our next soon-to-be overused strategy. We're going to keep spamming this move until it hits its limit, until we're just barely alive on 10 HP to then use Rest, recovering back all of our HP. Now we're asleep on our own terms. And while we do have to waste 2 turns, Swift barely does anything anymore, so we can just whittle away at Revavroom using Cavette, and that's Revavroom finally down. I have never spoken about this boss battle in any of my videos since there has never been the need, and this time it took up an entire page of my script. I'm hoping that this is just one of those rare early exceptions since we're still pretty limited on tools, and not an ominous warning for what's to come. While we haven't struggled too much so far, we're now to the portion of the game which I consider to be the first of the rare difficulty spikes this game features. Both Iono and Mela can be incredibly tough boss battles depending on your encounters up till now. Iono having 4 electric Pokemon with few common weaknesses, while also having a hard-hitting ace with no weaknesses, on top of having moves which few Pokemon you have access to can resist. And Mela being a Team Star boss that takes advantage of weather and has a Starmobile with speed boost. And of course, piled onto that, our library of Pokemon isn't really well equipped to deal with fire and electric types all too well. So yeah, this should be fun. Now, unlike my Leon run, we don't really have any Pokemon that can really take advantage of boosting moves like Swords Dance. Instead, I opt to go for a more defensive tactic for which I use up one of my encounter slots. Back to Route 1, we catch another very important member of the run, Hoppip. Like I mentioned before, Grass types get some amazing support moves and the Hoppip line takes this to another level. With that, I think we're ready for Iono. Oh right. I use Nemona's Rockruff as an opportunity to zap a couple of bulk ups at Makuhita as she begins the double team spam, which pays off as we miss 4 Force Palms while getting pelted with rocks. Eventually, on a turn that she chooses to set up yet another double team, we ironically hit the Force Palm, bringing Poor Me out. Poor Me does outspeed, dodging the first with Dig, but after taking a hit, Makuhita hits the next one, getting the one-shot. Nemona terrestrializes, revealing Floragato moves first as I had the same idea. Adding goes for a Hone Claws, which is kinda concerning, but we've got 2 defense boosts. Makuhita hits a Terra boosted +2 Force Palm, only barely doing over half. Don't tell me that our stats have already peaked. I thought we would at least hold up against other mons until the mid-game, but we should be fine with our boost, as Floragato moves first, using Magical Leaf. Okay, let's pause for a second. The turn prior, Nemona used a Hone Claws. Hone Claws raises 2 stats. The first is physical attack. Magical Leaf is a special move. The second is accuracy. The whole gimmick of Magical Leaf is that it never misses. Do the people that make these teams even know the mechanics of their own game? Like sure, many early game trainers have moves that act sort of like a wasted move slot to make it easier, but surely there's another move that they can use that is at least somewhat helpful. Why am I even trying to make sense of it? Anyway, Floragato hits Magical Leaf, leaving Makuhita on just 7 HP. If we had missed even one more Force Palm against Rockruff, we would have already lost Makuhita. Another Force Palm ends the battle. You know things are dire when I'm struggling against a rival fight. But that's not who I was concerned about. There were very few ideas I had to handle Iono, and even the one I came up with requires some luck. Iono leads with Wattrel and I send out Jigglypuff. Thankfully Wattrel doesn't hit too hard, it got a crit turn 1. Well, the plan doesn't change. We start setting up stockpiles, raising our defenses. After setting up 3, which is the max for stockpile, we seem to be in the 3-hit range. So I stay in for a body slam, which crits leaving Wattrel in the red. The fact that it didn't kill is actually the better outcome as Wattrel hits the weakest and then even gets infatuated, meaning we can just have a little rest. While it does hit 1 spark, it can't move the next turn nor the turn after, allowing us to wake up to hit with a final body slam. Belly Bolt's next and we have no reason to switch out based on the damage Spark does. I begin using Echoed Voice, which increases in damage every consecutive turn, but this also powers up Belly Bolt's electric moves thanks to its ability. And then it also gets infatuated. We're able to bring Belly Bolt safely into the red until it finally managed to get an attack off, leaving us in the red. Another Echoed Voice and Belly Bolt goes down. Now it would have been amazing if he could have stayed in for another attack, as Echoed Voice could have luckily one-shot with how many boosts it has, but that's a little too risky, so I opt to just use Rest. Spark actually does a little bit too much. By the time we wake up, we're already at half health, and we're only really able to get off 2 attacks before needing to rest again. Luckily 2 more hits is all we need, but instead of finishing Luxio off, I opt to use another rest, leaving Jigglypuff at full health, because now is when we should start positioning for the next Pokemon. I switch into Pooper on the Spark, and then Makuhita on the Bite. Now I can outspeed using Fake Out to finish Luxio off. And finally is the ace Mismagius. I immediately switch out to Jigglypuff, as despite the fact that Mismagius terrestrializes into an electric type, its strongest move is still Hex, which we're immune to. Or it uses a Confuse Ray. No damage either way. Then back into Pooper on the Charge Beam, which is ineffective, and now all we have to do is hope that Hex doesn't do too, or it can just use another Confuse Ray. Works too. And Pooper is able to still hit a Poison Jab, doing massive damage, but not getting the poison this turn. And yup, that's my strat. The reason we can't do this using Toxic Spikes is because Mismagius has the ability to Levitate, which lets it avoid all ground hazards. Also, Pooper's too young to learn Toxic. But this does give me an idea. If Mismagius is baited into using Confuse Ray, then we can just switch back into Jigglypuff on the Hex, removing our confusion, back into Pooper on the Charge Beam, and then we take another Confuse Ray. This means we only take damage a third of the time, and the damage we will take will be far less than the Hex from Mismagius. We still don't get the poison, but Mismagius is now below half. So do this little cycle one more time, but this time Mismagius used a Confuse Ray on the switch into Pooper, which means we have to do this again, as it won't have the need to use Confuse Ray again. Luckily, there's no risk of doing this however many times we want, as the AI will never use Charge Beam against Pooper, and will never use Hex against Jigglypuff. One more Confuse Ray, which Pooper once again pushes past. And we finally get the poison. Not as good for us now, but we can safely stall out the remaining HP by just switching out with our tried and tested cycle, until Mismagius finally goes down, winning us the 3rd badge. And we have beaten Iono not only with the weakest Pokemon, but with no losses. Even Leon's team required the Swords Dance boosts, but this team of babies managed to pull off a deathless fight on one of the harder fights in the game. To be honest, at this point I can kind of figure out how to cheese the boss, and we kind of had exactly what we needed to do so. Didn't even need to use Hopper, basically she was there to get off a lead seed if needed. Regardless, no small feat. We'll take the victories we can get, since it'll only get more difficult from here. Because next up is Mela, and our encounter pool isn't really too well suited to handle fire types. I do catch one more Pokemon, that being Tadbulb, as it'll be one of the bulkier Pokemon that we can get this run. And while I do have more encounter slots available, which I should have used for Marill, I didn't know that they were eligible just yet. But we do have one Pokemon that could potentially turn this fight into a joke. So on to Mela. Mela leads with Torkoal, and we start with Makuhita. Torkoal sets up the sun, and our first objective is to stall this out. We can waste a turn using Fake Out, flinching Torkoal, and then switch into the star of this battle, Charcadet, who is not only a fire type which resists fire moves, but also has the ability Flash Fire, which nullifies them completely. And since the only other move Torkoal has is Clear Smog, we can switch out to Pooper, who 4 times resists it, do this maneuver one more time, and as Pooper comes out, the sun fades. Now Pooper's already fulfilled her role, so I decide to stay in on the Flame Wheel just to see if we can get her for poison before needing to switch out, which we get on the first turn. That makes this next part much simpler, as we can just keep swapping around as poison slowly eats away at Torkoal, and then Charcadet can finish it off using a Nightshade. And out comes the Revavroom. Now we can't status these things, and they're fairly bulky, so my first goal is to completely remove its attack. Luckily it's not going to use a fire move, so we can just switch into Shinx, who lowers his attack with Intimidate as he gets his defense lowered by Screech. That doesn't matter, as we're just going to switch back into Charcadet on the Blazing Talk and do this 6 more times, or so I thought, until Revavroom started using Swifts, which means we've already lowered it as much as it needs to be. So into Jigglypuff as Swift does nothing and I stay in a turn, as Revavroom uses an Overheat, which does do a lot of initial damage but cuts his special attack in half, and this turn I even went for a Stockpile, making us all that much more bulky. A Citrus Berry brings us back over half, and look at how little Overheat does now. This once again lowers its special attack, and this might encourage it to start using physical attacks again, but I decided to go for a Charm, lowering its attack even further by 2 stages. Do this one more time, and this poor thing is now essentially neutered. And now we can just start spamming Body Slam, as Blazing Talk does absolutely nothing. It does eventually burn us and brings Jigglypuff low, but then we can just rest up, healing back all of our wounds. Continue the Body Slam spam until Revavroom finally goes down. And once again, we have defeated one of the bosses I dread the most, Deathless. Turns out they're actually not too bad if you prepare for them. Who would have known? But still, I hope I'm appropriately conveying how important defensive mons are in this challenge, because the strats I've been using for these last few battles are gonna basically be the foundation upon which I plan out strats for our future battles, varying mostly on the type specialty of the boss and some other variations depending on what we have available, because from here on out, conversely to my last few challenges, it's only gonna get much more difficult as bosses will start using fully evolved Pokemon, while we have to make it work with child labor from the daycare. Now, while I did make a pretty big claim that this game's only going to get more difficult, these next two battles aren't really that bad. I'm not going to show you the massacre of poor Ortega, but it's basically shut down after a Will-O-Wisp, after which we can just then spam Flame Charge. It does have Wrap allowing it to trap us, but it goes down quickly, barely doing enough damage for it to really matter too much. But Kofi requires a bit more strategizing. We cut Veluza's attack immediately with Intimidate, and for some reason goes for a Pluck, stealing my Citrus Berry. Spark does over half and even paralyzes, meaning we can just outspeed the next turn to finish it off. With Wugtrio out, I switch into Pooper expecting a water move but get hit with a headbutt. This doesn't reveal our ability, meaning Wug goes for a Water Pulse the next turn, restoring our HP back, and I set up a layer of Toxic Spikes. Into Smoliv on the Mud Slap, then after we tank a headbutt, we miss Seed Bomb. Our Citrus Berry allows us to stay in for one more, and Smoliv is able to hit the next one, getting us the one shot. Wow, they really weren't doing Wugtrio any favors giving it the same stats as Dugtrio. And finally it's Crobobbinable, who gets poisoned by the spikes. I'm expecting a Rock Smash, so I switch into Shinx to intimidate him, as Kofi terrestrializes and still does a fair bit of damage. Now we know a water move's coming, so into Pooper to eat, and then we just alternate between her and Jigglypuff for a bit. I then realize that Crobobbinable's only been going for Rock Smashes, so I stay to use a Dig, burning another turn of poison. Pooper hits Dig the next turn, bringing Crobobbinable down, avenging her brother from my last run, and getting us the 4th badge. Alright, pretty straightforward battle, but the next one I'm actually kind of concerned about. Next up on our hit list is Atticus, the Poison Team Star Boss. Someone who has frequently given me quite some trouble, but never been outright too difficult. But here's the issue this time. We're using extremely weak Pokemon where we need to rely heavily on defense. Atticus now has 3 fully evolved Pokemon and a Starmobile. On top of that, all of them are poison types, meaning our poison stall is just not possible with this battle. And we only have one Pokemon that can actually resist poison, so we can't be passive this time. We actually have to go on the offensive. We do have a whole bunch of encounters available, but our best options are Diglett and Roly-Coly. While yes, they do resist poison, they will die to literally any other hit. In fact, I don't even think Diglett's surviving an ineffective attack. As it stands, we're gonna need something more than just encounters, and considering how far into the video we are, I figure it's time to pull out some of my BS tactics to make our little factory workers ever so much more viable. Just outside of Cascarafa, we have the Asado Desert, and spread across the desert, there are a whole bunch of items scattered about, many of which sell for a pretty high value. And conveniently for us, by moving the clock a day, all of these items respawn, allowing us to pan for gold however many times we want. In like 15 minutes, you can get about 100k. And since at this stage in the game, we match the levels of the Pokemon here, we can do this with absolutely no risk to our Pokemon at all. And if any of you have watched my previous videos, you'd know that whenever we have something that we can grind for in a reasonable amount of time, with no risk to our Pokemon, we can just speed up the process a little. We now have unlimited money, and that's not all. While looking for items, we even come across these Terra Dens, which just by interacting with them give you a whole bunch of league points. And just like the items, these two reset whenever you push the day forward, meaning we now also have unlimited league points. So what does this mean for us? Well, for one, thanks to the Let's Go feature, we can collect materials with no risk to our Pokemon as they can't die. And with unlimited LP, we can just craft whatever TMs we want now, as long as we have the recipe and access to the Pokemon that drop said materials. But even better, since we have unlimited money, we can buy whatever items we want now. Now, held items from the Delibird presents are obvious, but unfortunately many of the good items are locked behind needing to complete the main campaign. Funnily enough, this includes the item Eviolite, which boosts your Pokemon defense as long as it can still evolve. Would have been perfect for us, huh? But there's something far much more valuable that money can buy. Drugs. Legal drugs, mind you. Right from the start of the game, at the Chansey supply store, we can buy EV boosting items. Now, if you don't know what EVs are, basically each time you defeat a Pokemon, you gain EV points in one of your stats, which is then used in the calculation to determine your actual stat. Each stat has a limit, and you also have a limit for the total number of EVs you can have across the board. And, as of the last generation, these items can now be used to max out your EV stats. And while they do cost a lot of money, we have unlimited funds. This may be me pushing the reasonable time rule I said earlier, but you can also buy items that increase the amount of EVs you gain from Pokemon, and Route 1 has every mon you need to EV train any of your 6 stats. So pick whichever poison that makes my justification easier to swallow. Point being that from here on out, all of my Pokemon will be EV trained, and we can also teach any TMs that we have the recipe for. Trust me, while I don't like using these tactics, this will be like the bare minimum we need to stand on equal ground against the Pokemon that we're about to face. God, we haven't even started the Atticus battle yet. For reference, in my previous 2 Paldean runs, we would have already defeated the league by this stage in the video. Anyway, while we do have a lot of encounter slots, there are only 2 more Pokemon that we need to catch for this battle. The first is back in the Asado Desert, Flittle, who is one of the 2 psychic Pokemon that we have available, and the only one that isn't weak to poison. I also wasted an encounter slot here catching Rellor, who I learned doesn't gain its psychic typing until it evolves, meaning this will always only be a bug, and we really don't need bugs in this run. And the last Pokemon I get is Happiny, another wall but this time more focused on special defense. This will be yet another mainstay. We teach some TMs to our Pokemon and we're finally ready to take on Atticus. Atticus leads with Skuntank and I send out Pooper. Now Skuntank can't poison us and Venoshock is 4 times weak, so it most likely won't go for that, leaving only Sucker Punch. Meaning we can just stall these out by spamming Amnesia, which also maxes out our special defense. On Skuntank's second to last Sucker Punch, I use a Yawn, which means the next turn when she finally runs out, she'll also fall asleep. This wasn't really necessary as we can only get off 1 dig before she wakes up, and Venoshock only does 3 points of damage. I don't think that's the threat that you think it is, Atticus. 2 more digs and Skuntank goes down. Next up's Revavroom, and while it does have Bulldoze, a physical ground move which we're weak to, I do stay in 1 turn to get off a Yawn. Citrus Berry pulls me out of a non-crit range, but I figure it's best to not take a chance. Switching out to Shinx to lower Rev's attack, as it uses a not very effective Iron Head. That wasn't planned, but I guess it makes sense, as they both do about the same amount of damage to Pooper, and then it falls asleep. Into Happiny while he's asleep, and I use a Charm to cut his attack by 2 stages. Back to Shinx to get off another Intimidate, and Rev still stays asleep. Expecting a Bulldoze, I switch into Makuhita, getting hit with Sludge, a special move. Why does it have that? And then it poisons. That's not looking good for me. At the very least, Poison triggers our Berry, allowing Makuhita to stay in for 1 more turn. Sludge does a lot, and a 4 times effective Bulldoze gets the 1-shot. Muck's out, and Makuhita can't stay in. I'm expecting a Sludge Wave, so into Pooper, who eats. Mug does have a super effective Mud Slap, but it barely does any damage, so I stay in to get off a Yawn. We can take 1 more, so I stay on the Mud Slap and rest up to heal back to full as Mug falls asleep. Basically all I wanted was Pooper at full health, and now we can safely switch out into Flittle, who can outspeed to set up a light screen, halving any special attacks, which is all Mug has. And then we can pelt away with Psybeam, revealing a 3-hit KO. Mug does wake up after the second turn and uses a Sludge Wave that still does well over half. And also poisons. Why is this the battle that I'm getting such bad luck? Citrus Berry pulls our health back above half, and we can at least outspeed to finish Muck off. But none of these Pokemon were the ones we were too worried about. Finally, it's the bigger Revavroom, and we're not in an amazing position. And unfortunately, we only just got her, but I figured the best move here is to sacrifice Flittle, using a priority Baby Doll Eyes, reducing Rev's attack by 1 stage. A Noxious Talk gets us our 3rd loss. But her sacrifice wasn't in vain, as now can safely bring out Happiny, who can take a Noxious Talk all that much better, and can use a Charm to lower its attack even further by 2 stages. The next Noxious Talk does barely anything but does get the poison. Our Berry brings us above half and we use 1 more Charm. Unfortunately, we landed a Serene Grace Happiny instead of a Natural Cure one, which would have been infinitely better as we could have removed statuses on Switch. Imagine that with Rest. But she's done all that she needs to for this battle. 1 last Charm and we can use a Rest next turn, restoring all of our HP back and removing the poison. Into Tadbulb, who gets hit with a Noxious Talk, and it also poisons. Why? We can at least stay in for a few hits, and when Tadbulb gets low, back into Pooper. And yeah, Revavroom can barely do anything to us anymore. Even a crit isn't fatal. Revavroom forsakes his speed, spamming Spin Out while we wait out Pooper's nap. And now we can just start spamming Dig. Even at -6 speed, Revavroom still outspeeds. But that doesn't matter as it can do nothing in return. We just keep hitting Dig until Revavroom finally goes down. And we have beaten the 13 star base with only 1 loss. But unfortunately, that was a pretty large loss, considering Flittle had a lot of utility on top of being fast, and also one of our only psychic types. That was probably the longest battle we've had so far, but at least we can have a moment of relief as the next couple of battles should be fairly straightforward. With the team star base behind, we're free to move on to the next gym, and this time we get to fight our good pal Larry. Before moving on, I do catch one more encounter, that being Roly-Coly, our only rock type, and the only Pokemon available to us that resists normal types. Larry never fails to let me down, so while there are a couple of points of concern, I think with my cheesy strategy we should be fine. Larry leads with Komala and I send out Jigglypuff. Kamala's moveset is pretty limited, so I figured this is the perfect Pokemon to set up on. So, as we get yawned, Jigglypuff cuts Kamala's attack in half with Charm. Jigglypuff falling asleep isn't too bad, so I stay in as Larry uses another yawn for some reason. Very clever Larry, most people would have switched out. And we cut his attack even further. And with Kamala's attack low, we can just stall out the sleep as Slam doesn't do all that much. Until we wake up turn 1 to use the final charm, reducing his attack to nothing. Now I want to absorb another yawn, so I stay in for a body slam, and then use another as Jigglypuff falls asleep. I was going to switch out, but I had a slightly better idea. I go for a rest which restores us back to full, but puts us back to sleep. But now we know exactly how many turns we'll be asleep for, so I stay in for 2 more slams, which means the next turn Jigglypuff attacks, it'll be guaranteed to wake up. So into Roly-Coly on the not very effective slam, and we get a free move as Komala fails the Sucker Punch, while we set up Stealth Rocks. Next into Pooper on another failed Sucker Punch, and as we get yawned, Pooper sets up a layer of Toxic Spikes. Another yawn for some reason, so another layer of Toxic Spikes. We fall asleep, so I try using a couple of turns to wake up, but after 2 I figure I may as well switch. And so it's time to bring out the star of this battle, Makahisa. Okay, Slam still seems to do a lot, but now what we're gonna do is just spam Bulk Up. Kamala does go for a yawn, but we can at least use one more before we fall. Are you f***ing serious? Well, it was bound to happen eventually, but I only managed to get off one Bulk Up. And why didn't it use yawn again like it always does? Right, so that kind of derailed my plans. Kamala is still at -6 attack, but we don't really have any Pokemon that can set up. I bring out Shinx, and after getting yawned, finish Kamala off with a Spark. At the very least, I had the foresight to set up hazards, meaning the Dunsparce takes some damage and then gets badly poisoned on the switch in. So we can bring out our trusty tank on the drill run, who'll wake up the next turn, and Hyper Drill still does far too much. We do cut his attack in half, but we aren't surviving another, meaning Jigglypuff is out for the rest of the battle. I figure I can at least get another attack drop, bringing out Shinx with Intimidate, and even at -3 attack, Hyper Drill does almost half. And now even switching is a concern, as Jigglypuff will die, and all of my remaining Pokemon are weak to ground, and we still have one more to go. How did things go so wrong after losing just one Pokemon? Bear in mind, we're using like the best Pokemon we can for this gym. Unfortunately, I don't really see any other option but to stay in. But we do manage to survive the first draw run, triggering our berry. And Spark still wasn't quite enough to bring the Dunsparce in range of poison damage. But now all we need to do is waste a turn, so into Roly-Coly on the Hyper Drill for some reason. I guess it saw kill either way, so it was random. I mean, I'll take it. Poison finishes the Dunsparce off. Finally a Staraptor, and let me tell you, I'm terrified of Staraptor. The idea was that Makahisa would have had enough defense boost to survive one aerial ace, but now we only have one Pokemon that resists any of its moves. And Staraptor is going to terrestrialize into a normal type, which will turn its normal attacks into nukes. On top of that, Staraptor is initially a flying type, so it doesn't even get poisoned, meaning we have to go on the offensive. In hindsight, this was a good thing, as it has the move Facade, which does double damage if the Pokemon is statist. But like, what are we even supposed to do? At the very least, it takes 25% damage when switching in thanks to Stealth Rocks. I switch into Shinx to at least get one attack drop, and a Terra boosted Facade leaves Shinx as a shadow etched into the floor. I'm not even sure what I was hoping Charcadet would do. There goes our only fire type. All we have to rely on is Roly-Coly, who resists both of Staraptor's attacks. And all we can do is spam Ancient Power, our strongest move, which isn't even super effective anymore, while tanking Facades, which seems to do about 20 points of damage. God, I don't even want to think of what would happen if this thing had close combat. Our berry lets us take at least one more hit, and after 4 Ancient Powers with no boosts, a Facade leaves Roly-Coly on 10 HP, and our final Ancient Power is indeed enough to finish Staraptor off, winning us the 5th gym badge. Larry, what's gotten into you today? You never give me this much trouble. Wait a second. Larry, are you upset that only 5% of my viewers are actually subscribed to me? Come on, Larry, that's no reason to lash out. I'm sure they just didn't know how much it helps me, us, out, and that they can choose to unsubscribe whenever they want. See, look, they're even liking the video just for you. Right? Well, that was a massacre. Losing 3 Pokemon is already pretty bad, but we lost 3 extremely important Pokemon. Our only fighting type that covered quite a few types that we no longer can. Our only fire type who had Will-O-Wisp to burn our opponents to cut their attack in half. And our only Mon with Intimidate, which allows us to cut attack on switching. I'm gonna be honest, I think this run's already a failure. But at least we have plenty of encounter slots and oh no. Why do I keep forgetting about this battle? What do you mean I can't say no? That's not the reason I'm declining. They aren't fatigue ether, they're dead. You're gonna kill me, Nemona. So yep, once again, I forgot about this battle and the fact that we have to go into it without even a chance to switch out our Pokemon. Meaning now not only does she have higher levels and more Pokemon, but we have to deal with them using only 3. At the very least, Nemona leads with Lycanroc, who doesn't really have any fancy moves yet, so we can just stick to completely disarming her with Charm. After its attack is all the way down, into Pooper on Accelerock, and we can safely set up Toxic Spikes on turns that we don't get flinched. After setting up the second layer, we can Toxic Lycanroc and then switch into Roly-Poly on the Bite, set up Stealth Rocks and then back into Jigglypuff on the Accelerock. And now while Lycanroc slowly succumbs to poison, we can set up all the stockpiles we can. Next is Pawmo, who honestly at this stage can do nothing to us, but I figure it's best to cut its attack anyway. And then it even gets hit with Q-Charm, meaning it won't be able to attack 50% of the time. And since we're low, we can just use a rest to recover all of our health back. Poison eventually does the job, and out comes Gumi. Gumi's a special attacker, so I go on the offensive this time. Body Slam doing well over half. Alright, I wasn't expecting that from Jigglypuff. Another one finishes Gumi off. Not bad so far, right? What was I even complaining about? You fool. None of these Pokemon were even slightly a concern. But out comes Meowscarada. Remember how I said that I chose the starter that would make our lives more difficult? Meowscarada has the move Flower Trick, which never misses and always crits. Crits ignore any defense boosts or attack drops either side has, meaning our core strategy just falls apart. On top of that, it even boosts the damage of the move, meaning it's a free 105 base power move, which will also get another boost as Meowscarada terrestrializes, and we only have 3 Pokemon, none of which resist grass. And we have to Toxic Stall this thing. It's a dead run. I stay on the Flower Trick. And Jigglypuff survives. Why didn't I go for rest? I very stupidly use a Body Slam that does barely anything. But now we have to just accept the inevitable. And Meowscarada goes for a Slash. Why? It shouldn't have even seen a kill with that. I don't understand this game. But we may actually have a chance to come off this battle unscathed if Nemona is baited into using this move. Into Roly-Poly. And yeah, I don't know why I was being hopeful. But thanks to the earlier Body Slams, we only need to stall one more turn. And with 2 Pokemon still alive, we've at least won the battle. But the question is, who do we sacrifice? Both of my remaining Pokemon are still very crucial members, but there's only one that actually has a chance of staying alive. Into Pooper. And something I only just realized, it can Terra into a poison type, resisting Flower Trick. But with its weak defenses, is that even enough to survive a crit? Meowscarada uses a not very effective Flower Trick. And Pooper survives on 8 HP. A poison jab ends Meowscarada and keeps this run just barely alive. What an absolute mess. I honestly didn't once think that I really needed to plan for these last 2 battles. But I guess I was in need of a wake-up call. That every battle from here on out needs a solid plan going in, and winging it isn't good enough. So, on that track, we have a team to rebuild, and plenty of encounter slots to do so. Now, I took the making a plan thing to heart, and was trying to come up with various strategies for the next gym. Because next we have a double battle, and double battles are scary. There's a chance at any moment that we could get doubled into and lose a Pokemon to the whims of the AI, and our prime strategy of Toxic Stalling is far much harder to pull off. On top of that, the next battle throws free stat boosts left and right to both us and the gym leader, and this is usually when a Pokemon faints, so even sacking a Pokemon is pretty risky. During this catch spree, I catch a Marill, which I would have gotten far earlier had I known that was actually illegible, but I don't think this gym is where its usefulness will shine. I head back to the desert to pick up Bramblin, as it's the only ghost type that we have access to since Dreepy is a version exclusive. But our next mainstay on the team makes its home in the Tag Tree Thicket. And that of course is Squovet. No, obviously not, but it will be important for this gym. No, who we're here for is this little guy right here. Impidimp. Now, Impidimp doesn't really have that many things going for him, but the one thing he does have is massive. I could have worded that better. And that's its ability, Prankster. Prankster gives any status move priority, meaning MP Dimp will almost always move first. As you can imagine, that opens up so many strategies for us, just knowing that we can get the first turn in. On top of that, MP Dimp gets both screen setting moves, which halves damage from attacks, and, for some reason, it is now the only Pokemon line that learns Confide, a move that lowers the opponent's special attack by 1 stage. Sounds kind of underwhelming, but you'd be surprised how rare these kinds of moves are and how little spread they have across Pokemon, especially compared to how many physical attack lowering moves there are. But I think that's about all we need for now. This time I'm going in with an actual plan, and that's all we need. For the 6th gym, I bring Jigglypuff, Bramblin, Impidimp, Squirvet, Hoppip, and Happiny. Rhyme leads with Mimikyu and Bayonet, and I sent out Jigglypuff and Bramblin. I know both mons are baited into targeting Bramblin, so turn 1 we protect. As expected, both Mimikyu and Bayonet go for a Shadow Sneak on Bramblin, who is protected. Jigglypuff gets a free turn to use Charm, harshly lowering Mimikyu's attack, as I suspect that will be on the field longer. And we get another turn by switching into Squirvet, is what I would have said, but Mimikyu actually targets Jigglypuff this time. It doesn't do much, and we use another Charm. Instead of trying to get another free turn, I stay in as Squirvet gets hit with Sucker Punch, and Jigglypuff gets hit with a Weak Slash. This was so I could break Mimikyu's disguise with Bite, and Jigglypuff gets off a Charm on Bayonet. Now into Impidimp on Mimikyu's Slash, and this time Bayonet opts to use Icy Wind, unaffected by the stat drops, but still does almost nothing. Speed control isn't really something that we're going for anyway. Impidimp gets to use a priority Nasty Plot, doubling his attack, takes another Slash, and then both mons get hit with an Icy Wind. Jigglypuff sets up a Light Screen to offset some of that damage. Now this is a bit of a risky play, but I switch into Hoppip as it gets hit with a Slash, and then a 4 times effective Icy Wind, which it survives. Hoppip's Berry restores some of its health, and now Impidimp can one-shot Bayonet with the Dark Pulse. This gives us another attack boost, and out comes Houndstone. And I'm pretty confident it's going to target Impidimp as it has Play Rough, which is super effective. Mimikyu could go either way, but it won't get a kill, so this turn I protect Impidimp, as both Pokemon target it. Best case scenario. And Hoppip even manages to land the Sleep Powder on Houndstone, giving us a free turn. This time I let Hoppip use Protect as Mimikyu falls for the bait. Houndstone stays asleep and Impidimp's Dark Pulse gets another one-shot. We get yet another attack boost, but this is the part I was worried about. Out comes Toxtricity, and not only will it Terrastalize, not only does it have 2 attacks with spread damage, but it will also get an Omni boost. We need to take care of this thing as soon as possible, and of course, I have a plan. I'm 90% sure that Tox will go for a Discharge as the AI don't know that they're about to Terra, so Discharge does more damage in their minds. So I switch Hoppip out for Bramblin as Tox Terrastalizes and protect Impidimp. Mimikyu attempts to use a Slash on Bramblin, which is ineffective, and as expected, Tox uses a Discharge which Bramblin resists. And then Mimikyu gets paralyzed. That couldn't have gone better. And then Bramblin gets paralyzed. Should have known. And at the end of the turn, the crowd gives Rhyme her Omni boost. So now we need to hope that it doesn't get an attack off on Impidimp. And even Mimikyu gets one. I mean, it doesn't really matter, and I kind of expected it, but it did catch me off guard. Well, while Tox would have been able to finish Impidimp off, I'm pretty sure it'll target Bramblin, so into Happiny, as Toxtricity does indeed fail a Hex. And then Mimikyu can't move. A +3 super effective Dark Pulse doesn't get the kill. And then both of Rhyme's mons get a speed boost. Okay, this is where I kind of thought the battle would have been won, but now we've got to improvise. Thankfully I did pick Happiny to bring out, so I can protect and beat him on the Discharge, even bait the Slash, and set up a Light Screen halving special attacks. Now back into Bramblin, and I kinda want to see how much Discharge actually does, and we have just the move for that. Impidimp gets priority on the rest, restoring all of its HP back, and then eats his berry to wake up. Out comes Discharge, and even through the screen, leaves Impidimp on just 12 HP, but fortunately finishes its ally Mimikyu off. But now, unlike last time, I'm not as confident Tox will be targeting Bramblin, as it probably sees a kill on both mons with Discharge, but I have no other plans, so let's run it. Into Jigglypuff, and Tox uses an ineffective Hex. A final Dark Pulse finishes Toxtricity off, winning us the 6th badge with no losses. That went so smoothly, at least as much as I could have asked for, especially considering our last couple of battles, and to do it without a single loss as well. You know, I always roll my eyes when NPCs tell me how great I did, but you know what? Thanks, Hassel. I did great. Now I think we're through the toughest part for this section, as these next few battles typically don't give us too much trouble. And even using our squishy little baby Pokemon, I think we should be fine with some planning. First up, we've got the Ford Tyson, Great Tusk, but after charming it with Hoppip, cutting its attack in half, and then setting up a Leech Seed, we can just pretty much wall with Jigglypuff, restoring any damage that's done to us with Leech Seed and Draining Kiss. Even a crit does less than half. The exact same strat also works during the second phase with Arven, except this time we also have a meat shield that does damage every now and then. But onto the Nemona battle right before the next gym, and while I did say the next part's easy, I always run into some issues with her. And unfortunately, everything that we struggled against in the last battle was still present for this one. At least we get to use a full team this time. Nemona leads with Lycanroc and I send out Jigglypuff. We do the exact same thing as last time. Keep using Charm until Lycanroc no longer has the ability to do damage. Switch into Pooper, of course get crit on the switch in, and set up 2 layers of Toxic Spikes and some rocks. I do stay in 1 extra turn to trigger my berry to have more health on the next switch in, and use Poison Jab, which even gets the poison. But back into Jigglypuff and I start setting up stockpiles, raising our defense. After which we can finish Lycanroc off with the Draining Kiss. Next is Pawmort, and we do literally the exact same thing. Charm until Pawmort can't hurt us, it gets infatuated and we just start pecking away. And whilst Ligoo is a special attacker, its moves barely do anything. Draining Kiss basically restores all of our health back. Aside from that, I do use this as an opportunity to rest up, removing paralysis before the big Meowscarada comes out. And this of course is who we're worried about. Now while I am asleep, I plan this I'd wake up the next turn, so as Meowscarada terrestrializes and uses its always critting move, breaking past our defenses, Jigglypuff barely survives and restores all of her health back using another rest. And you guessed it, our strat is a simple Toxic Stall. Now Jigglypuff managed to survive a neutral Flower Trick, so surely Bramblin a not very effective one? No, obviously not. I may have forgotten that I gave Jigglypuff max defense bulk EVs. But this gives me a free switch into Pooper, who we can protect the next turn as we terrestrialize, which then bait Slash the next turn, as for some reason the AI don't take into account that Flower Trick is an always critting move. And Poison Jab brings Meowscarada on the brink of death, succumbing to poison damage right after. Nice and clean this time. Yup, can't think of anything that went wrong. I mentioned having a full team would be useful, but we ended up just using the same 2 mons as last time. And no one else. But anyway, we have everyone we need for the next gym, and it's not one I'm worried about, so let's just get this over with. Tulip leads with Farigiraf, and of course I send out Jigglypuff. Farigiraf only has physical moves, so we're just going to spend these first few turns taking away its ability to attack. It even gets infatuated, making this process a whole lot easier. And now Farigiraf can do literally nothing. Even a crit wouldn't be nearly enough to kill. So onto the next step, I send out Tarantula, who has only one job. Set up Sticky Webs, which lowers the Pokemon's speed on switch in. Well, on the turn it doesn't get flinched. Then we can switch right into Impidimp. And Impidimp is not only immune to Psychic, but also 4 times resists Dark, with Crunch being Farigiraf's only other attack. This will be important later, but for now it was only so we could safely switch in Pooper so that we can set up Toxic Spikes. Now into Happiny and we can set up a Light Clay boosted light screen, honestly just cause we can. And back into Impidimp. Now we can set up a substitute, which Farigiraf has no real way of breaking, even likely with a crit, so we're safe to set up a couple of nasty plots. I opt for 2 as I want the screen to be up for our next mon. Even on the 3rd turn of being hit with Crunch, the substitute still holds strong, and a +4 Dark Pulse gets the one shot. Next is Gardevoir, which is perfect as the sub is still up, and even with the webs, I'm not really sure if I outspeed. It turns out I do, which is massive information as Gardevoir still survives, and Energy Ball breaks our wall. But we now know we outspeed, so another Dark Pulse. Espathra has both Shadow Ball, which is resisted, and Quick Attack, which is coming off her weak attack stat, so we should be fine either way. I use this as a chance to use a final nasty plot, but forget about Espathra's ability, which copies my stat boost. I offset this using Resto Chesto, and Dark Pulse gets another one shot while we're around half HP. Finally is Florges, and now that we know that we outsped Gardevoir, we know we can safely stay in as Florges terrestrializes, a +6 Dark Pulse getting a final one shot. And that's Tulip. Honestly, could have made this quicker, but it's better to be safe, I guess. Especially after our previous blunders. Now Grusha is ironically a little bit tougher for us, as we don't really have any access to Pokemon strong against ice, the few we did have being dead. But I've had a cheesy strategy brewing up in my head for a while, and we now have the tools to pull it off, and I reckon Grusha would make for a good guinea pig. So I teach Jigglypuff a few new moves, and let's get our final badge. Grusha leads with Frostmoth, and I send out Pooper holding a Focus Sash. Now I'm sure Frostmoth was going for a Tailwind, but better to have insurance. We set up a Stealth Rocks. Now right into Happiny on the Mist Blizzard. We dodge another one, and up goes the light screen. And now we can bring out the star of this battle, into Jigglypuff, and Blizzard still does far too much even with the light screen up. But we can survive another, and Tailwind just expired, so we're able to get off at least one stockpile safely, raising our defenses. Jigglypuff also has leftovers on hand, so we can restore some HP passively. And that's basically how we spend our first few turns. Set up all the stockpiles we can, and rest whenever our HP gets low. Now Blizzard crit would have been scary, but it only has 5 power points, so by this point Frostmoth has already run out, and now only has Bug Buzz as an attacking move, which we resist. So we're free to set up all we want. Once the final stockpile's up, we can move on to Calm Mind to max out our special attack and our special defense. I'm kind of rushing through this, but it's funny how you can see us go from midday right into the night just getting set up. Man, I miss speed up. One last rest to restore our HP, and once we wake up, we can finally use our secret weapon, Stored Power. Stored Power is a move that increases in power the more stat boosts you have. Basically, you start off at 20 BP and then gain an extra 20 per boost. We have maxed out our special attack and our special defense and have 3 boosts in defense. That gives us a Stored Power base power of 320. And that's not even considering the attack boost we get from our max special attack. So from here on out, it's a sweep. We don't outspeed, but with our boost to our defenses, there is literally nothing Grusha can do but pray for a crit, which likely won't even kill. This is actually disgusting, and I hope you enjoy this strat, cause it is far from the last time you'll see it. And there's the final badge. This is a completely broken strat that I would ban under any other circumstances, but it's not entirely foolproof. We still could get crit during setup as we do require a lot of turns, which would basically invalidate the strat. And with our Pokemon limitations with how squishy and slow a lot of them are, there's plenty of room to fail. That's not even mentioning that there are many Pokemon that you just have no chance of setting up against, and some types that don't mesh well with Stored Power, and the Pokemon that can use it. It's not as free as you might think at first. That being said, Ortega doesn't stand a chance. Once Hoppip lowers Azumarill's attack with a barrage of charms, it can do nothing to Jigglypuff, and Ortega gets Stored Power swept. Even a super effective 130 BP Steel Roller does barely anything to Jiggly with her defense EVs and boosts. And it can't even use it anymore as it removes the terrain. Stored Power doesn't get the kill, but nothing Revavroom does matters. It uses a Confuse Ray, but Jiggly pushes through using a final Stored Power. I'm not gonna lie, it felt good having a power trip. Kind of a little reward for how painful the lead up was. The final Titan is also something I don't really need to say much about. Basically, Smoliv sets up a lead seed on Dondozo, and then we can just stall turns as Greedent does most of the work. Any damage we take is mostly restored thanks to how much HP Dondozo has. Bring out Pooper with Water Absorb when Smoliv gets low, and finish it off with a Poison Jab into takedown. Tatsugiri could have been a little bit tougher, but it targets Greedent turn 1, allowing us a safe lead seed. And then we can just switch into Marill, who completely walls it, and from there just stall it until we win the final Titan battle. Now, Eri is a battle I almost always struggle against. I genuinely think that she's one of the tougher fights in this game, especially when you're doing a challenge with limited options for Pokemon. And even with her secret weapon, this time there are quite a few Pokemon that can counter Jiggly before she can even get off 2 moves, including her Leadmon. Eri leads with Toxicroak and I send out Pooper. We resist both of Toxicroak's stabs, so the only thing that's baited into using is Sucker Punch, and you already know our strat for Sucker Punch. We spend the first few turns alternating between Toxic Spikes and Protect until he runs out of Sucker Punches. Take a weak Brick Break and do over half with Earthquake. For some reason, Eri goes for a 4 times resisted Poison Jab and another Earthquake finishes Toxicroak off. And Eri sends out Annihilate. Remember I was talking about a few of her Pokemon being able to counter Jigglypuff? Her Ace Annihilate is not one of them. I kinda did regret setting up the Toxic Spikes as now we're on a bit of a timer. Into Marill on the Ice Punch, and we just charm away as its strongest attack is Rage Fist, which, as long as we don't attack Annihilate, won't do much. Since we don't have much time, I figured 2 charms is enough, and we switch into Jigglypuff on the Fire Punch for some reason. It's like the move that would have done the least damage to Marill. Jigglypuff's now able to tank a close combat, and we set up 1 stockpile as Annihilate succumbs to poison. I really regret setting up Toxic Spikes. And for some reason, Eri sends out Passimian. Why not Lucario? Unfortunately, even Eri, the final boss before the endgame, is victim to Scarlet and Violet's baffling team building. It turns out Lucario has no Steel-type moves for whatever reason, and is walled by Jigglypuff. I may have been a bit too concerned about this battle. Anyway, Passimian's close combat does a little less than half, and with a stockpile boost and some HP from leftovers, we can survive another. I'm cutting it close here, but I decide to use another stockpile, hoping that the HP we get from leftovers is enough for us to tank the next one. And we didn't even need it, as Jigglypuff survives on 22 HP. A rest restores us back to full, and now Passimian can't do anything. It uses up its remaining close combats during the 2 turns we were asleep, and is now forced to use a Seed Bomb on the turn that we wake up to use Calm Mind. Passimian succumbs to poison, and out comes Lucario. Now, like we discovered, Lucario is hard-walled. It has neutral fighting stab, but even a crit won't kill. and it also can't get poisoned, so we have all the time we need to set up our remaining Calm Minds, while resting up whenever we get low. And from here, it's our classic stored power sweep. Even Revavroom this time is a fighting type, so after tanking a super effective spin out, a single stored power is all we need. Don't tell me seeing that HP bar decimated in one hit wasn't satisfying. And we have beaten Eri, the final story event before the endgame boss rush. How far into the video? Why do my challenge runs always take so long? Well, we're in the home stretch now, but in terms of battles, we're nowhere close to the end. But at least we now have some cheesy strats to speed things along. Well, as long as we can pull them off. So, during the Pokemon League, we have the chance to switch out Pokemon between battles, which helps us immensely. But we won't have the chance to catch anymore. So the first thing I do is round up some more encounters, using up some of our many accumulated slots. One thing we're lacking in is speed, and it would be good to have a Pokemon that's actually capable of revenge killing. So first I target a few flying types. They're typically faster and can have a few useful utility moves like Tailwind, and are also good to sack for free switches. So back on Route 1 I catch myself a Fletchling and a Wingull. The next two on my list are the Diglett-Wiglett duo. They're extremely frail, but are also surprisingly fast, and both Pokemon get some priority moves. So both could be useful options to get off some quick damage, or sack. I also grab a Noibat, cause why not? We aren't exactly starving for encounter slots anymore. And I think that's about all we need. Truth be told, I think we're pretty happy with our current team, but it's good to have backups just in case. Onto the Pokemon League. First up's Rika, and fittingly, she's likely going to be the easiest person in the league. Rika leads with Whiscash, and I set out Poopa. Poopa still has his Focus Sash equipped, so he's able to survive on just 1 HP, being able to set up a Stealth Rocks. This may seem unnecessary, but will be important later on. Into Happiny on the Muddy Water, which was an interesting choice. And after taking another one, we can set up a Light Screen. Finally into Jigglypuff, and you already know what's coming. Or we just get crit turn 1. Well, I did say there were holes in the plan. I'm feeling confident though, so after leftovers, I figure I can stay in for another hit as Whiscash uses a Muddy Water. We survive, and Jiggly sets up a Calm Mind, restore some more HP with leftovers, and Whiscash goes for the Earth Power, us surviving on 12 HP. A rest brings us back to full, and from here on out, it's just boring old setup time. Muddy Water does have the chance to lower our accuracy, but once we have all of our defenses set up, it shouldn't really matter. But I do opt to use only 3 Calm Minds this time so we can save 3 turns. Another rest to restore all our health, and after we wake up, a stored power gets the one-shot. Next is Camerupt. A super effective Flash Cannon does nothing, one-shot with stored power, or miss. Fire Blast this time, one-shot with stored power. Donphan's turn, and while it does have Sturdy, which allows us to survive a one-hit KO move, we set up Rocks which breaks this. Tank a Poison Jab, stored power. Dugtrio is next, and I figured this is a safe Pokemon to rest up on, as it sets up a Sandstorm. We wake up, stored power. And finally is Clod, stored power. And that's Rika. I think you can kind of see where this Elite Four's going. Well, or so I would say, but our next battle is against Poppy, and she might be the toughest one yet. Because our strategy is pretty much impossible to pull off considering her specialty are Steel types. And Jigglypuff is very much weak against Steel. So I'm gonna need to actually strategize this time. Say it isn't so. Poppy leads with Copper and I set up Marill. We don't exactly wall, but it can outspeed to use Charm, cutting Raja's attack in half. And it actually does set up Stealth Rocks. This could be problematic as this is one of the few battles where we likely could be switching out a lot. But we stick to what we know, 2 more Charms, and Raja's now harmless. I switch into Smoliv, taking the Rocks damage, and even at -6 attack, Heavy Slam brings us below half. But this does trigger our berry, allowing us to survive another. And we use that turn to set up a Leech Seed, which shows you the sheer difference between our HP stats. I stall one turn with Protect and switch into our physically EV'd Pooper as it takes Rocks, then a Heavy Slam. And yeah, Leech Seed almost recovered all of the damage that we just took. Use a Protect to bring us back to full, and then set up our own Stealth Rocks the next turn. Another Protect to stall a turn, then back into Marill on the High Horsepower, which also triggers our berry. And after another Protect, Leech Seed restores some of our HP back and brings Copper Raja into range of Marill's Surf. This was important as now Magnezone's already out, breaking it sturdy on the rocks, like Donphan before. And we switch right into Diglett on the Discharge, and Diglett can outspeed to use a 4 times effective Earthquake, getting the one-shot. Corviknight's up, and this can be a concerning one as it has a combination of Iron Defense and Body Press, which uses the Pokemon's defense for the damage calculation instead of attack. And unlike attack, we have no moves to lower its defense, so we can't let it set up. I brought back our little Tadbulb for this very moment. Though a not very effective Brave Bird still does a lot of damage. This activates our berry, so we should be able to survive another attack. And Corviknight goes for the Iron Defense. I do try to mitigate this by setting up a Reflect which should halve any physical damage done to us, including damage done from Body Press, but it still did quite a lot. We go for a Volt Switch, which barely leaves Corviknight alive, and I bring out Marill. A Discharge probably would have killed, but I didn't want to take the chance. Thankfully, however, Marill resists Body Press, so Corviknight uses a Brave Bird that does nothing with our Reflect Up and its weak attack. A Surf finishes it off. Bronzong's turn, and this thing isn't so much as threatening as it is just annoying with how bulky it is. Thankfully, this one's a physical attacker, so we can just charm away. We can also outspeed, meaning no flinches from Iron Head or Zen Headbutt. Once it's been nerfed, I bring back Smoliv, who after being flinched on the first turn, can set up a lead seed on the next. Unlike Operaja, we restore a lot less HP from Bronzong. While I do stall a turn using Protect, that isn't necessarily our main strat this time. Instead, I just keep switching around with my still healthy mons until Bronzong gets roughly around half. And since Impedimp was the one out when that happened, I also set up a Reflect. Finally, I bring out Diglett, who despite having paper-thin defenses, now takes attacks like a champ. And because of his abysmal HP, we actually restore quite a large percentage back from Bronzong. And what we're gonna do is just spam Swords Dance, raising our attack while Lead Seed restores back all the damage that we take. And on the second turn, that's about as much as Bronzong can take. It gets drained by Lead Seed. Finally on the Ace Tinkerton, and while Tinkerton is surprisingly speedy, Terrestrialization proves Diglett to be faster. A +4 Terra boosted super effective Earthquake gets the one-shot and brings us past the second Elite Four member. That is possibly the most I have and will ever say about Poppy. She was actually genuinely one of the tougher boss battles this time around. But ironically, our good friend Larry seems to have calmed down a bit, and is actually going to be an easy one this time. Tropius is such a cool design wasted on an incredibly mediocre Pokemon. Even its Solar Beams do barely anything after just one defense boost. We have absolutely no issue setting up against it, though it does take ages. And Stored Power. Next is good old Staraptor. Stored Power. That felt so cathartic. Altaria is pretty weak, so I figure it's a good checkpoint to rest up. Stored Power. Oricorio. Stored Power. And finally Flameek. Stored Power. Thank you for making this an easy one, Larry. Even he knows when he goes overboard. He still does want you to subscribe though. On to Hassel. Now, Hassel could be a tricky one. We're still looking for a way to get the Stored Power sweep, but his lead Pokemon Noivern is a special attacker. And as you might remember, special attack is far harder to lower. And there's also something else. I lead with Impidimp, who I gave back Confide to, along with Light Screen, which I spend the first turn setting up. And out comes the move that makes Noivern problematic. It has Super Fang, which always halves your HP regardless of any attack debuffs. Meaning even if it's at -6 and Jigglypuff has maxed out defenses, it could just use a Super Fang to bring us to half, and if it gets a crit the next turn, it's just over. I spent these next 2 turns confiding in Noivern, slowly lowering a special attack, then using Resto Chesto to regain my HP back to continue the Confide spam. And yup, there's a clear-cut example of how bad Super Fang is. You saw how little those previous attacks did, and yet our HP was cut in half, just like that. Imagine that after a rest where we can do nothing. After setting up a Light Screen again, another Super Fang comes out, basically forcing me to switch out, despite not having used all the Confides I could have. Now the good thing about Super Fang is that it only has 90% accuracy, and only has 10 power points, of which Noivern's already used 3. Jigglypuff comes in on the Air Slash and then immediately takes a devastating Super Fang as it sets up a stockpile. This isn't really going to work out, so I make a bit of a gamble expecting another Super Fang, and switch out to Impidimp. And it pays off. This was pretty much so I could PP stall Noivern of his remaining Super Fangs using a rest the next turn to bait more. And it works out as Noivern uses 2 in a row, the second one even missing. Only 3 left. This even gives me the chance to use a Confide, Noivern using yet another Super Fang, and repeat. Noivern actually uses another Super Fang on the turn I rested. It's almost like it read me. It tries switching it up a bit using an Air Slash, but falls back to old patterns the next turn using its final Super Fang. And we even wake up the next turn, getting off the final Confide we can. Rest up, and this time I switch into Happiny so I can get up a Light Clay boosted Light Screen, after we stop flinching. Now back into Jigglypuff, and with us being freed of Super Fang, you know the drill. We actually get to the point where Noivern's Air Slash does less than 10 points of damage, which our leftovers can just heal up. This whole ordeal took so long that Noivern's only left with Dragon Pulses, which Fairy types are immune to. But I think it's time we put it out of its misery. Stored Power. Dragalge uses a surprisingly strong Sludge Bomb that does almost half, even with our maxed out special defense. Stored Power. Haxorus. Stored Power. I tried to rest up on Flapple, but it proved pointless as it sets up a Leech Seed, which by the time I wake up has drained me back to where I was. Stored Power. And finally Baxcalibur. Stored Power. That just goes to show you how important leads are for us in this challenge. Unlike other challenge runs, it's hard for us to just one-shot the lead and find a different Pokemon to set up on. We kind of have to make do with what we have. Like explaining the whole Noivern setup saga took more time than most battles I've covered. But with that, we are now on the final battle of the Pokemon League. And unlike the last few, unfortunately the champion battle against Geetha is not one where we can really abuse the stored power sweep. So yeah, here's yet another battle where we actually need to strategize. Geetha leads with Espathra and I lead with Hoppip. Now, while I'm usually pretty critical of Geetha's team, especially with Espathra not having speed boost for some reason, its actual ability is what makes the stored power sweep impossible to pull off. Opportunist copies any stat boost that we get, so anytime we try to set up, Espathra would get that boost too, so we'd likely be swept there and then. Espathra sets up a Reflect as we set up a Leech Seed, and we stall the next turn with Protect. Next into Impidimp on the ineffective Lumina Crash, and we use a Light Screen which lets us tank the super effective Dazzling Gleam. We took that pretty well, so I decided to stall out the remaining HP using Confide, restoring most of the damage that we take with Leech Seed. Espathra even starts using Quick Attacks instead. On Espathra's last turn, I set up a Reflect as Leech Seed leaves Espathra on what's probably 1 HP. Well, the Light Screen wears off so we can at least set up another. Leech Seed drains Espathra of her remaining health. Oh sorry, 2 HP. Next up's Go-Goat, who is not who I wanted to see. I was expecting and hoping for King Gambit, as that's the one other Pokemon who stops our stored power sweep. But into Pooper as it bulks up, and as it sets up another, we can just Toxic it. Stall one turn with Protect, revealing that it's going for a Zen Headbutt, so into Impidimp who's immune. Expecting Play Rough, I switch into Marrow as it misses, stall a turn with Protect, then expecting a Horn Leech, switch into Hoppip who 4 times resists it, and it still does more than half, at least activating the berry. Go-Goat succumbs to poison, and Geetha sends out Veluza. I know an Ice Fang's coming, so into Marill who 4 times resists it thanks to its Thick Fat ability. And we stay in a turn as Veluza uses another Ice Fang for some reason. I've given up trying to figure out the AI. A Charm cuts its attack by half. We take a Psycho Cut pretty well, so we just Charm away. Now this would have been the perfect opportunity to start setting up for stored power, but with King Gambit still in the back, it would be pointless. Instead, I switch into Pooper as it goes for another Ice Fang. I mean, better for us, but why? Once again, we Toxic it and stall a turn with Protect. We can survive a couple of attacks, so I stay in and get hit with a Liquidation. I kinda forgot that this had Mold Breaker, which nullifies abilities, and even lowers our defense. We set up another layer of Toxic Spikes, and we can stay in for another turn so up for Stealth Rocks, forgetting that I should have stalled a turn with Protect. Back into Marill on the Aqua Jet, and we still have the remaining turn of Poison with Protect. And then Avalugg comes out. King Gambit's gonna be terrifying with his boosted Supreme Overlord ability when it's his turn. It gets poisoned by spikes and takes some damage from the rocks. And Marill completely walls, so we can just Charm away. Now, while I should have stalled more turns of poison, I wanted to Reflect to be up before King Gambit came out, so I switched into Impidimp on the Avalanche, which doesn't really do much. This gives me the confidence to use Reflect, and what a stupid mistake that was. No longer bound by type disadvantages, Avalugg goes for a Body Press, which if you remember, isn't affected by attack drops, finally ending Impidimp's long service. I'm sorry Impidimp. For the second time, Avalugg of all Pokemon has me with Body Press, and right before the endgame boss rush as well. This was entirely avoidable just by, you know, not switching. I hope the Reflect's worth it. Impidimp's sacrifice did open up a new strat for us, however. I can safely bring out our Focus Sash wearing Diglett and set up a Swords Dance as Body Press leaves us on just 1 HP. Poison didn't quite finish Avalugg off, but that's perfect as Diglett can use an Overkill +2 Earthquake to avenge our fallen friend. King Gambit finally takes his place on the field, armed with the 4 Pokemon Sacrifice Supreme Overlord boost. But thankfully, even Champion Geetha is victim to awful movesets, not having Sucker Punch on King Gambit for some reason. So we can outspeed, and a +2 super effective Earthquake gets the one-shot. That was the first super effective move I used this battle. And finally it's Glimmora. Terrestrialization reveals that we outspeed. And if we could one-shot a King Gambit, a +2 Terra-boosted super effective Earthquake will one-shot Glimmora, winning us the champion battle. We were so close to doing that deathless, and in the end, the Reflect didn't even matter. Though that was mostly because of how well Impidimp Sacrifice positioned us at the end. I'm gonna miss you, buddy. But with that, we have inched ever so closely to finally putting this challenge behind us. While we have found a pretty busted strategy, there are quite a few holes in the plan, and some pretty hard counters to it. And the thing is, we aren't actually pulling this off as efficiently as we could. The first issue is that we're solely relying on our tank Jigglypuff to set up and then sweep all by herself. And while our lovely Jigglypuff has been carrying the world on her shoulders pretty effortlessly, she is a little slow. This opens her up to taking at least one attack per Pokemon, and while she should be bulky enough to take an attack by that stage, 2 crits in a row could finish us. So while she has done an amazing job throughout this run, it's about time that she passes the torch and takes some well-earned retirement. Don't worry, she still has her uses, so we won't be putting her in the home quite yet, but it's time for a new generation to take over. The other issue is a far more obvious one, and that is that we're relying on the move Stored Power, a psychic type move, which is completely ineffective against dark types, a type we'll be seeing every battle from here on out, and at that stage, our plan just falls apart. Now obviously we could just give her a move that hits dark types, but the thing is that we need to teach it over one of her current moves, and she kinda needs all of them. So we need to evolve. And while we do have plenty of encounter slots, I think there are only 2 more Pokemon that we need to demolish this game. The first one we catch is Scarlet. Scarlet gets a whole bunch of utility moves that could be helpful for us. It's pretty speedy, and along with Jigglypuff, learns a very special move. And the final Pokemon that we catch for this run is Rolt, who, like Jigglypuff, can evolve into Curlier as she too has a base stat total below 280, which is actually news to me. Curlier is weaker than most starters, and like Jigglypuff before her, will be our new star. But before we can get into that, we have a few more moves to teach. Now Curlier's moveset's pretty simple. We give her Stored Power of course, and Dazzling Gleam to hit dark types. I also give her Rest just in case she needs it, and Psychic Terrain, which we can set up to nullify priority moves. But as you may have noticed, she has no moves to set up with, but we'll get to that. Instead of explaining the plan, how about we use our dear friend Arven to demonstrate our scheme. Arven leads with Greedent, and I send out Hoppip. The first step is a familiar one as we cut Greedent's attack using Charm. Body Slam still does about half, and then paralyzes. That's annoying, but we can stay in for one more turn as we still outspeed and push past to use another Charm. The next Body Slam triggers our Berry, so one more Charm. Now out comes Jigglypuff on the Body Slam, the damage taken being restored entirely by leftovers. And well, you don't really need me to explain to you this next part. What's important is what comes next. Like I mentioned earlier, there's a special move that both Jigglypuff and Scarlet can learn, that being Baton Pass. Baton Pass allows us to switch out Pokemon while transferring any stat changes, along with some other stuff the user has, meaning we're now free to set up with our tanky Jigglypuff and just pass all of her stat changes to the frail Curlier. And quite honestly, that may have been enough, but we want to guarantee our win at this point. Earlier, I was still a bit skeptical on whether we'd actually complete this challenge, but now the end's in our vision, so let's make this airtight. And that's where Scarlet comes along with 2 moves, Sticky Webs, an Entry Hazard which lowers the opponent's speed on switch-in, and Agility which raises our speed by 2 stages. There is one more move I teach later that makes this more secure, but I forgot about that this battle. There's no reason for Sticky Webs this battle, so I move straight into Agility, and despite how frail Scarlet is, with Greedent being at -6 attack and our boosted defenses, Body Slam does nothing. Then of course we get paralyzed. Scarlet's also holding a Focus Sash just in case the first Body Slam crit. I figure best to be safe and outspeed to use another Agility, putting us at +4 speed. And now we can Baton Pass into our new Grim Reaper, Curlier. Thankfully this time, Body Slam doesn't get the paralysis, but I had a Lumberry just in case. And now Curlier is on the field with a total of 19 boosts, giving it Stored Power, a base power of 400. And with our speed boost, the only thing that's stopping this monster is a priority move that also crits. And even one might not be enough. Goodbye Greedent. Goodbye Toadscrawl. Goodbye Scovillain. Goodbye Garganackle. And goodbye Cloyster. This feels illegal. Remember how Arven said I should be worried about my future? Well, finally it's Mabostiv, a Dark-type Pokemon, which would have been hard-wall to Jigglypuff with only Stored Power, but has nothing to stop the Fairy-type Dazzling Gleam from Curlier. And that's Arven. God, what have we done to this game? Listen, this may feel cheap, but you've seen how much damage we do without boosts, and how much damage we take. It's either this, or Toxic stalling every Pokemon. One at least lets us get through this game quicker. Let me have this victory lap, okay? So, onto Clavel. Now Clavel leads with Oranguru, who we need to deal with slightly differently. This time I lead with Scarlet. The only attacking moves it has is Dream Eater, which only works when the opponent's asleep, and Foul Play, which uses the opponent's attack stat, which as you can imagine is pretty good for us. We're pretty much safe from harm this time, so I decided to just set up Agilities right from the start as we get yawned. Another agility, and this time Oranguru sets up a reflect. We fall asleep, but since I knew Scarlet was safe, I gave him a lumberry to wake right up. And now we can use the next special move that we taught, Substitute, which will now do two things. We're no longer affected by some status moves like Yawn, and if we do get crit, our Substitute will just absorb all the extra damage. In this particular case, Oranguru can do nothing to us now. I use another agility as Oranguru breaks the Substitute with Foul Play. So the next turn, I use another one on the failed Yawn. And Baton Pass doesn't only pass stats, but also substitutes. So Jigglypuff comes out with the sub still intact, and now Foul Play is resisted, meaning it can't even break the sub in one hit. So time for the setup. I also gave Jigglypuff Taunt, which blocks the opponent from using status moves for 3 turns, meaning Foul Play is all Oranguru can really use. The damage we just recover back with leftovers. And eventually, after setting up, making sure it's a turn that Oranguru is still taunted, we Baton Pass to our dear Curlier, and stored power. Goodbye Oranguru. Houndoom is a dark type, so we're forced to use a Dazzling Gleam, which while not super effective because of the fire typing, still gets the one shot. Stored power, stored power, stored power, and stored power. What have we unleashed? Poor Penny. Penny leads with Umbreon, and unlike Oranguru, this thing doesn't use any unconventional tactics. Umbreon has very poor attacking stats and is a dark type, so it's walled by Jigglypuff, allowing us to set up all we want. It even gives us 2 free turns right off the bat using Baby Doll Eyes. Which, why? Eventually we Baton Pass into Scarlet, set up a couple of agilities as Umbreon has resorted to using quick attacks, eventually triggering our berry, then Baton Pass into the monster. Dark type right from the start, so Dazzling Gleam. And stored power, stored power, stored power, stored power, and stored power. Curlier, please. They have families. Nemona, you don't even know what's about to happen. Nemona leads with Lycanroc, and we don't really want to set up against her as she has both Stone Edge and Drill Run, both moves with a high chance to crit. So instead, I lead with little old Diglett holding a Focus Sash. Diglett, the mad lad, outspeeds and one-shots with Earthquake. Lycanroc didn't even get a turn to move. Out comes Goodra, and I think this is a much better mon to set up against. Not like we can really do much otherwise. Intapini on the Ice Beam, take a Dragon Pulse, and we set up a Light Clay boosted light screen. Now I hard switch into Jigglypuff as she's unaffected by the Dragon Pulse, and then I find out that it has a super effective Sludge Bomb, which does just under half. The light screen saved us. I used a Calm Mind this turn so I could survive another, but to be safe, I choose to Terrestrialize Jigglypuff into a normal type, so Sludge Bomb does less. Goodra switches back into Dragon Pulses, but we set up enough Calm Minds to shrug this off. By the time Light Screen wears out, it shouldn't matter anymore. I've replaced Taunt with Rest again, so when we get low, we just restore all of our HP back to full. And you already know. Eventually, when we're all set up, Baton Pass into Scarlet, I substitute turn 1 as Goodra uses a not very effective Ice Beam. Has it run out of Dragon Pulses? What about Sludge Bomb? I mean, works for me, but why? We can start setting up agilities from the safety behind our substitute. Goodra now switches to Muddy Waters for some reason, still keeping the sub intact. I use a Baton Pass the next turn, and I'm sorry, Nemona. Ice Beam finally breaks the substitute, but with no damage done to Curlier. Stored power. Orthworm, why must I be forced to kill you? Stored power. Poor Mort, I never really cared for you. Stored power. The Dunsparce, my beloved. I'm so sorry. Stored power. And finally Meowscarada. I'm conflicted about you. When in doubt, stored power. We need to put an end to this. I just wanted to beat a challenge that was taking me too long, not create something that could derail the ecosystem of this planet as we know it. The fate of the future left at the whims of 2 fairies spells doom for mankind. We must seal them away. And to do so, we must delve into the Great Crater of Paldea, Area 0. If we allow them to make their homes here, they will have no need to meddle with the affairs of our surface dwellers. But this isn't enough. Come a few years, they shall grow weary of the fresh meat thrown at them, and will tune their attentions back to the surface. We must go even deeper to find game that will provide them with sufficient fuel to satiate their bloodlust. Deep at the lowest levels of the abyss, we have found the perfect spot to allow our monsters to graze on the unsuspecting Pokémon. But there's already a creature that's laid claim to the territory here. We can't have her foolishly sending our abominations back to civilization, purposefully or not. Sada leads with Slitherwings and I lead with Meryl. This poor fool sends out what is possibly the worst Pokemon she could have for a rampage. Marill completely walled Slitherwing's stabs, forcing it to use a much weaker Zen headbutt doing less than half. We use a charm, cutting its attack in half, and now we'll easily survive the next. Oh god, it doesn't even bring me below half. We take another weak one, and our Citrus Berry ruins all of that progress. It does at least get a flinch as a consolation prize. One more headbutt, and we can get off the final charm. Oh no, Slitherwings. Now we can bring out Jigglypuff, restoring all of the damage we took back with leftovers. Even Slitherwings knows it's over as it goes for a not very effective lunge instead of a neutral low sweep. Slitherwings is forced to watch in horror as the demonic balloon in front of him sets up all of the boosts it possibly can. Not once throughout this whole battle did we need to use rest. Eventually, we get to the point where it's time to pass the torch. Jigglypuff has possibly been the most important Pokemon during this run, but takes a final exit. Into Scarlet, who outspeeds to immediately set up a substitute, and now Slitherwings goes for a low sweep. Is it defying its master on purpose? Does it just want to be put out of its misery? Well, we don't get any stat drops behind the substitute, and are even able to set up 2 agilities before it breaks. Set up 1 final substitute and 1 final agility. And Scarlet has fulfilled her role flawlessly. She baton passes into our Judgment Bringer, Curlier. We could end this here and now, but decided to spend a turn using Psychic Terrain to block any priority moves in the future, as I very much don't want to see a crit. Slitherwing seems to have already seen the light as it uses a 4 times resisted low sweep, doing absolutely nothing, but lowering our speed by 1 stage. And now let's take a look at what's about to happen. Curlier has a total of 20 stat boosts, the debuffs not mattering. This will give our stored power a base power of 420. For comparison, Hyper Beam has 150. On top of that, we have a stab boost, bumping this to 630. It's also super effective against Slitherwing, doubling it to 1260. We even have max special attack, quadrupling this number to 5040. And we aren't even done. We've set up Psychic Terrain, which powers up psychic moves by 30%. Slitherwings gets hit with a 6552 base power stored power, finally receiving the salvation it's been seeking. Stored power one-shots Fluttermane, stored power one-shots Sandy Shocks, and stored power one-shots this poor imitation of the peak life form as Psychic Terrain finally disappears. This may have been the one smart thing Sada has done this battle, as now out comes the Dark type, Brood Bonnet, and this has Sucker Punch, which will give her priority. A crit from this has the potential to kill, and that's why I wanted Psychic Terrain up, but she managed to just stall it out. We just have to take the chance. And she doesn't even use Sucker Punch. A +6 Dazzling Gleam gets the one-shot. Finally it's Roaring Moon, but with no priority moves available. A +6, 4 times effective Dazzling Gleam puts an end to Roaring Moon. And the Nuzlocke. Using the worst Pokemon in this game, we have still managed to absolutely humiliate the trainers of Paldea. With some cheese towards the end, but Surprisingly, Chura may have been a lot more difficult as he leads with Iron Moth, a fire poison special attacker, which would have been far harder to set up against, but I think he too would have fallen down the same path of destruction eventually. Sada finally decides to be useful to us as she flees her lost claim, taking our atrocities with her to the new world. Out of sight, out of mind. So yeah, thank you all for watching and sticking around through my long delay. Soon after my last video, I ended up sick with a thing that must not be named on YouTube, which, as you can imagine, tanked any motivation I had to do things. And then, soon after I recovered, a certain one of my videos got copyright struck down, for reasons I very much do not agree with. No strike on the channel, which is good, but still took that low motivation and brought it down to a new rock bottom. But on the bright side, we're back now, and during my break, I have finally been able to complete the dreaded challenge. So all my focus will be on getting that video out as soon as possible. If you enjoy my content, please consider liking and subscribing, and I promise delays of that length aren't going to be a common occurrence. And if they are, you can always unsubscribe. Next up's the big one, and while I did end up cheesing this challenge, Ditto only ones are not as easy to break. So I hope you stick around and look forward to more videos in the future.